The Chicago Bears are grappling with a growing list of injuries concentrated at some of the same positions, but their actions suggest they're not as concerned about it as we are.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, I want to check in on how the Bears are managing a couple of key injury situations, mainly at cornerback and running back. We'll hear from defensive coordinator Dennis Allen about how they're handling the secondary challenges and check in on sort of why they haven't really responded in any major way since the start of training camp. I also want to hear from Dennis Allen on how he's handling the pass rush rotation, because I think there's a lot we can learn there and some similar dynamics when you got a bunch of different players taking the field that aren't just, your planned day one starters. And then we'll check in on the running back position as well, where the Bears brought in a few different players for a workout, but yet still not signing anybody to add into that backfield. But I think the bigger concern is at corner, where we've known Jalen Johnson has been sidelined since the start of training camp, hasn't been a part of this team. We've checked in on him a little bit. We know now that Kyler Gordon is more week to week than day to day, but we don't know exactly what his status looks like for week one. And then we saw Terrell Smith get carted off against the Bills on Sunday. And well, at the time of this recording, we don't know the extent of that. Sure looked serious, and everyone talks about it as though it'll likely be a season-ending injury. And so those are like three of your top 4 or 5 cornerbacks on the depth chart, all sidelined at least for the short term with injury, if not for some potentially longer-term challenges there. And that seems like a real problem here. Like when you look at the Bears' depth chart at cornerback with those guys sidelined, you've got Tyreek Stevenson and Nashawn Wright are kind of your two outside cornerbacks then, which, okay, maybe you can get by with. But then if Kyler Gordon's also out, then Josh Blackwell is one of your top cornerbacks, your first guy in the slot off the bench there. And all of a sudden, if I came to you a month ago and said, hey, your cornerbacks week one are going to be Tyreek Stevenson, Nashawn Wright, and Josh Blackwell, I think we'd all be, if not panicking, definitely very concerned about what is happening in the Bears secondary. And we don't know who will or will not be available for week one. I'm pretty comfortable assuming Terrell Smith will not be ready for week one, but Jalen Johnson's a real question. Kyler Gordon is also a real question there, but it doesn't sound to me like Dennis Allen is particularly concerned as defensive coordinator, and I don't feel like we've seen Ryan Poles and the front office react as though they're particularly concerned. So let's start with the defensive coordinator, talking about how they're preparing that group and where they're looking to kind of make up for whatever deficiencies they might have in the secondary. And then we'll also check in on hey, maybe they're not panicking as much as it feels like we should be on the outside.
What do you appreciate about the depth you guys have in that room? I know it's been tested a little the last couple of weeks, but it seems
in the DB room?
Yeah, in the corner, with the corners especially.
Yeah. Well, look, I think, number one, I think Al's done a great job with those corners, of getting them to play our style of defense. One of the things that we've done pretty well, I think our pass defense has been pretty good throughout the course of training camp, the preseason. And I've always said this, I told the players this today, the best example of team defense is pass defense, because one doesn't work without the other, So if we're not disrupting the timing of the routes, then it doesn't really matter how good our rush is. And then if we have a great rush, but yet we're not doing anything in terms of covering the guys, it's a challenge. So I think that works together. And look, depth is what you need in this league, because eventually, injuries happen in this league, and you're going to have to call upon some guys that are going to be backup players to have to come out and play at a starter's level. And so that's why we coach every single one of them the same way, from the top of the roster down to the bottom of the roster, because we're going to need all these guys.
So it's not so much like a ringing endorsement of, wow, we've got so many great backups that we think are all going to be great, and we're not worried at all about backups being out there. But I do think it's an acknowledgement of like, hey, yeah, this is a reality that we prepare for, and that we sort of, assume that, you're going to be missing multiple starting cornerbacks at the same time, but that, they're not surprised when, injuries are going to happen, and this is going to be something they're going to have to be ready for, and count on these guys to be ready for, and then also try and lean on the pass rush to make up for some of those deficiencies there. And I get a little nervous because to me, for this Bears defense, it's like, well, I thought the deficiencies were in the pass rush, and so they were going to have to lean on the secondary to be a little bit better in coverage, to make up for the pass rush, maybe not always being up to snuff. But if a injured secondary is relying on an underpowered pass rush, then you've got both groups needing more from the other, and that's where I get a little bit concerned. But then also, we come back around and say, well, it's possible Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon are good to go for week 1, and Terrell Smith is the only thing you're missing from your secondary, and you can live without your number 4, number 5 cornerback. Like, that's probably the best case scenario at this point. And it just seems to me like the Bears aren't reacting as a team in a way that would suggest they're worried about their cornerbacks missing significant time, right? We haven't seen a corresponding roster move that suggests, oh no, we got to get some other people in here because we're not going to have the cornerbacks we expected to. Like, that move was at the beginning of training camp when they brought in a veteran free agent in Trey Flowers, someone who's experienced starter in the NFL, who was still on the street, 30 years old, been around the block a few times. Like, that was them responding to, hey, we're not so sure about this Jalen Johnson situation, so let's get somebody in here just in case this goes a little bit longer than we thought it would. But Kyler Gordon goes down and now he's, week to week, but there's no like corresponding, we got to go out and get another cornerback in here. It was like, no, they seemed prepared and willing and comfortable with just, well, we'll just ride this out with some of the guys that we have. And now Terrell Smith goes down, and I get maybe it's a little bit early for a reaction move, but I think the Bears probably have a better sense of how injured he is than we do at this point in the process. And again, there hasn't been this like, we got to go work out a bunch of cornerbacks and make a roster move to get another guy in here. Like, they don't seem to be that worried. And I think part of that can be an endorsement of the players they already have, and part of it can be an endorsement of, hey, maybe they're not as worried about some of these other injuries in particular being that long term. Like, yes, we've seen them swap out some bottom of the depth chart cornerbacks because, there were a couple bottom of the depth chart guys that also got injured and got placed on IR or released and moved on from that they now, Sean Wade was put on IR, the safety Major Burns was put on IR, so they brought in some other bottom of the roster guys. And that's, you just need bodies at camp. I get that. But, we see in the preseason game an undrafted rookie, Jeremiah Walker, coming out of Stephen F. Austin, played a lot in that preseason game, right? It's not like, we've got all these loaded veterans here. Like, it's still lesser known guys trying to prove themselves. And yet the Bears don't seem overly concerned at the cornerback spots. That to me is a good sign that not necessarily everyone will be healthy for week 1, but that they're not going to miss Jalen Johnson for a significant amount of time, nor Kyler Gordon for a significant amount of time. And they can withstand if they each miss a game or 2 or whatever that ultimately pans out. Whereas if they thought it was going to be 6 or 8 weeks, maybe they get a little bit more aggressive to go out and bring in another free agent because they're just going to need somebody to fill that hole for a little while. So I think we can avert some panic and have some trust in like, hey, they've got this taken care of with guys getting plenty of different opportunities in the secondary. And I want to use that as a jumping off point for how Dennis Allen is handling the defensive line. Not because of injuries there. They've been pretty darn healthy on the defensive line, but a similar approach of like, yeah, they're starters, but we need everybody to be a part of this. And I thought Dennis Allen had some really good insight on how he handles his defensive line rotation. So we'll check in quick on the defensive line before we get into the running back injuries on the other side of the ball next. on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. Now, NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. I know I play fantasy football on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your 1 millionth league. And Yahoo is celebrating 28 years of fantasy greatness and dropping 28 big new features over the course of 28 days throughout the month of August. To kick things off, they recently dropped Yahoo's Fantasy Guillotine Leagues. If you've never heard of it, it's a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo where the lowest scoring team each week gets eliminated from the league until there's only one team left standing. So with the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new game mode a try. Or if you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league as well. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. So we're going to see a lot of different faces popping up in the secondary as they recover from these injuries. And we're going to see quite a few faces a part of this defensive line rotation as well. Not because of injury, but because of defensive philosophy and also, I think, partially just the depth they've accrued, particularly on the interior, and maybe some of the questions about the depth on the edges. So like when you look at this Bears defensive line depth chart, there's a lot of different, especially defensive tackles that deserve to be a part of this rotation. And when you think about, 2 tackles and 2 defensive ends, the Bears got, at least 4 that they want to have a big part of the tackle rotation, maybe more like 5 or 6. We'll see how many they keep on the 53-man roster. And then at the edge rusher spot too, like they've got 5 guys all fighting for roster spots right now. And we've talked a little bit about the questions about how many they'll keep, but like it's going to be a real challenge for Dennis Allen and yet also a luxury to be able to get different guys involved here because you've got Grady Jarrett and Andrew Billings and Javon Dexter that all feel like starting caliber defensive tackles, but you're only really going to start 2 of those 3 guys. So you kind of have 3 starters filling 2 starting roles. And then Dennis Allen name dropped Chris Williams at defensive tackle. The guy from the Browns they traded for at the end of last preseason under the previous regime has really impressed this coaching staff throughout preseason and training camp. So he is going to be a big part of this rotation. Plus, Shamar Turner, your second-round rookie, is probably going to earn some snaps in there as well. That's 5. Then we haven't even mentioned Zach Pickens, the former third-round pick. If he's on the 53-man roster, that's 6 defensive tackles all being part of that group. And then on the edge, Montez Sweat and Dio Odengbo are your starters, and you need them to be big-time playmakers. But they signed Tano Passanio as a free agent defensive end at the start of training camp with some veteran experience. Austin Booker has obviously flashed throughout the preseason, and we still want to see more from Dominique Robinson potentially in that rotation. Guess we can't rule out Daniel Hardy, who's been a special teams ace for them being a part of this 53-man roster. So there's like a good 6 defensive line, 6 edge rushers and 6 tackles, 12 defensive linemen that all have an argument to be a part of this team. They're not going to keep 12 on the 53-man roster, certainly. 10 even seems like a little bit of a stretch. But I really liked the way Dennis Allen pretty clearly broke down the philosophy behind rotating so many defensive linemen. And I think he explained it in a way that is better than I could, and it helps to hear it right from the defensive coordinator's mouth. But I think it's the kind of thing that seems simple, and yet there's something about the way he explains it that just makes it really sink in and make more sense. So here's how he talks about his philosophy on the defensive line rotation and why even though Montez Sweat is a player who's going to be, your best pass rusher, at some point you're better off with him on the sideline if he gets a little gassed out there.
Dennis, how did you develop your philosophy for rotation along with your pass rushers? Because I know there's always this expectation that star guys, the guys who are paid the most money, are going to be the ones who are out there on critical downs. But to keep, like you were saying, keep guys fresh, how did you develop that?
Well, it just stands to reason that, a fresh body is better than a tired body. I mean, it just is. I mean, you watch it, and so even though a guy may be, your best rusher, if he's played 7, 8 snaps in a row rushing the quarterback, that takes a lot of energy. And so, probably rush number 5 and 6, you don't see the same quality of rusher. And so if you get a fresh guy out there with speed and athleticism, it helps you in terms of your rush. And so having a deep defensive line group that can go rush the passer, you keep coming at them in waves. And typically offensive linemen don't rotate in and out, so when they play 5, 6, 7, 8 snaps in a row, they're not as fresh as they were to start the series. And you throw a fresh body out there, it's a different speed coming at them.
That to me sounds like a defensive coordinator who's planning on keeping some extra bodies on his defensive line. Because when we think about like a standard 4-3 defense and the roster, and I think back to, the Lovie Smith days and into the Mel Tucker days and stuff, like when you're building the Bears 53-man roster defensive line, right, you got 2 ends, 2 tackles, and then probably a backup for each one. Like we think about 8 defensive linemen is kind of the minimum standard. And maybe you keep an extra player somewhere as some extra depth for 9, but 9's kind of been pushing it historically, right? You got a left end, like a left defensive end and a backup, a left defensive tackle and a backup, a right defensive tackle and a backup, and a right defensive end and a backup. But when Dennis Allen talks about like constantly having fresh bodies out there and really valuing your depth, like that to me sounds like a guy who's leaning towards like a 10-man defensive line where you keep 5 defensive ends and 5 defensive tackles so that when anybody starts to get a little bit gassed, you have fresh legs in there. And I just thought that was a really nice explanation of something that like does seem obvious, but the idea of like, yes, a tired Montez Sweat at 50 or 60% might not be as good as a well-rested, ready-to-go Austin Booker, who, of course, is nowhere near a well-rested, ready-to-go Montez Sweat. But when you start to depreciate from the star player and get a lesser version of him, sometimes the backup can start to be better. And as he mentioned too, the offensive linemen start to wear down, and that's when the backups can have some better performances against guys as they get gassed, as opposed to like beginning of the game or beginning of the drive. That's why your starters are out there. Like that's the whole difference between starters and backups there. And it reminds me of like kind of the trend we're seeing even in other sports in the NBA, right? Where it's almost a little bit less about your stars as it is about your depth there. Like it's more a war of attrition. It's not just like who has the one pass rusher who can make the big game-changing play. Like, yes, of course, you do need that. But is that one play more important than the 10 plays or the 15 plays that your depth gives you off the bench? Like if you can consistently pressure quarterbacks on more overall plays while getting a little bit less out of your star, like is that more important than truly having the star who will take over that one big play that can change the game? But even the best star pass rushers, I mean, do Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons, whoever, do they have that play every single game? Maybe more games than not. And this is, we don't need to go down the rabbit hole of that argument. But the point being, like, sometimes having 5 really good pass rushers is better than having 1 great pass rusher and then 4 lesser pass rushers. Like that split there is an interesting dynamic that I think Dennis Allen is going to experiment with a little bit and going to see how scheme-wise he can work with just like, let's just go with fresher bodies that might have more flaws as opposed to like overly relying on a trade for Micah Parsons or a trade for Trey Hendrickson where it's just like, we're counting on you to be that guy every week. And that's tough to do. And some players can do it and not everyone can. And so when you don't have that player, then you got to rely on your depth. And that's when we need to see somebody like Austin Booker and Tano Passanio and Dominic Robinson be better this season than we've seen them throughout their careers. And that's where that's where I come back to like, I'm a little nervous because he says, well, if the secondary is injured, we need a better pass rush. But I've been saying from the beginning that like I have questions about this pass rush, so they sure will need the secondary to be good so that the pass rush can have a little bit more time to get to the quarterback. But if they're both relying on each other to be better than they are, then maybe neither will get what they need and then both will struggle. And that's the concern there. I think Dennis Allen and the new staff deserves some benefit of the doubt there as well. So I'm certainly not ready to panic, especially as we've kind of talked about the theme today, the Bears not panicking. They haven't gone out and added a big pass rusher. They haven't gone out and added a big corner. And they haven't gone out and added a big running back, despite some different options available. That's another spot loaded with injuries that they were playing their 6th and 7th and 8th running backs in the last preseason game. So we'll check in on that position and why the Bears continue to not really address it next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Gametime. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends and family? Or maybe it's a concert and you're like, oh, I didn't know they were going to be in town. Let's get some tickets quick and go tonight, when you realize, oh no, I really want to be in the stands. Well, that's exactly where Gametime comes in, because it's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. Gametime makes buying tickets simple and easy because they've got a low price guarantee that makes sure you're always getting the best deal on your tickets. Plus, you can see your view from your seat. And I love they have a no added fees option. So you see the final price when you pick your tickets and not get anything added at the end of the checkout process that makes your tickets cost way more than you thought they would. I use the Gametime app on my phone all the time. I've got My Chemical Romance tickets at Soldier Field next week that I'm going to with the Gametime app. I've gotten Bears tickets, basketball, baseball tickets, and more. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Just as the Bears haven't panicked and haven't made a big response at cornerback, the same thing is true at running back, despite injuries really mounting at that position as well, where we saw on Sunday against the Buffalo Bills, they wanted to hold DeAndre Swift out for whatever reason, veteran starter or whatever. I don't know. He didn't seem like he's old enough to have earned that, so I don't know if there's some kind of minor thing he's dealing with there. But then we know Roschon Johnson's been out for a while now, and that's a situation that I don't feel like we're talking about enough as a Chicago Bears media and fans and everything, because like he's been kind of just kind of disappeared. And so, Kyle Monangai's been there to kind of step up and absorb those roles, but now Kyle Monangai dealing with an injury, not able to be a part of the preseason game. And then they hold Travis Homer out as well. Not super clear if he had an injury or if that was just a veteran thing. Again, like I don't know why, those guys are in the same category as Joe Thuney and Grady Jarrett when like DJ Moore plays, Tremaine Edmonds plays, but DeAndre Swift and Travis Homer don't. So I wonder if there's an injury, like a minor injury thing there where it's just like they're fine, but no need to put them out in a preseason game. So they start with undrafted rookie free agent running back Deion Hankins, and he gets hurt. So then they're down to two running backs. You're down your top 5 running backs in the depth chart in this game. And they were just rolling with Ian Wheeler and then Britton Brown, who they signed as a free agent a couple weeks ago after a workout, a UCLA running back who's been on a couple of different practice squads over the last couple of seasons. But that Britton Brown signing has really been the only move they've made at running back all offseason, besides the Kyle Monangai drafting in the 7th round. And so, I look at that initially and I'm like, okay, 5 running backs are sidelined. That feels like as close to like red alert, hey, we need to get somebody else in here as you can get on paper in a vacuum. But then you start to apply the context a little bit and say, okay, DeAndre Swift not hurt in any known meaningful way, so your starter's fine. Roschon Johnson, real concern. We'll circle back to that in a second. But then Kyle Monangai sounds like he left practice on the Friday before the Sunday preseason game with something, but Ryan Poles said, I think, on the broadcast that he'll be fine, not worried about him. So, okay, maybe not a big deal there. Travis Homer, maybe not as big of a deal there. And yet, the Bears still on Tuesday brought in a trio of running backs for another workout. This is now the second group of running backs they've brought in for workouts. They're clearly at least checking in and keeping tabs on their running back options just in case. They did it a few weeks ago, or maybe it's a week ago. The timeline on that is blurry for me, where Jamal Williams, formerly of the Saints and Detroit Lions, came in for a workout. But I think it's really important to note that Jamal Williams was not the only running back that came in for that workout. They also worked out Britton Brown, who they signed essentially instead of Jamal Williams. And so the Bears looked at that. I think that was directly a result of, hey, Roschon Johnson's out, and we need another body in camp just to handle handoffs. Like, we use a lot of running backs. It's a big part of our offense. Let's get somebody else in here just to kind of keep the roster stacked, even though Britton Brown doesn't have any sort of real chance of making the 53-man roster. But the fact that they signed a running back who doesn't have a 53-man roster shot and is just a practice squad guy, as opposed to signing a running back like Jamal Williams, who's been, I think, a 1,000-yard rusher in the NFL. Certainly he led the NFL in touchdowns one of those years with the Detroit Lions in there. Like, that to me is a little bit more of that would signal something different about this backfield. And yes, he did have 1,000 yards that one year in Detroit when he had 17 touchdowns. Like, if you had signed Jamal Williams, that's them saying, oh, we need to bring in someone else who's really going to play some regular season snaps, because we need like an extra back who's actually going to be a really big part of this rotation, not just somebody to get some handoffs at training camp and see if we can develop them into something. Or in this latest running back group they brought in for workouts, one of the running backs they worked out was the only one you will have heard of potentially is Royce Freeman, who was a former third-round pick by the Denver Broncos a few seasons ago. And he's never been a 1,000-yard back certainly, but he's a versatile ball carrier who's been around the league a little bit. He's maybe never been a true workhorse starting back, but a quality backup who has some pass catching upside out of the backfield and maybe can do a little bit of special teams for you. And actually, he was really briefly part of the Bears practice squad last offseason, so they're probably just kind of checking in and seeing on how he is doing, plus a couple of other undrafted rookie running backs were the other players they worked out. So it seems to be this level of like, hey, let's just make sure that we are up to date on running backs who may have been injured or running backs who may not have seen a little bit. Let's just get some fresh info and tabs and fresh eyes on Jamal Williams, on Royce Freeman, to kind of check in and say, okay, if during the season we suffer a significant injury, now we know where those guys are at, and we can decide with a more informed opinion on whether to bring them in at that point or not. But the fact that they don't bring them in now suggests they're not worried about the running back position. To me, it suggests Roschon Johnson will be back sooner rather than later. I mean, I have no idea what that timeline might look like, but I think if they think Roschon Johnson's going to say miss the season or miss half the season, they sign a Jamal Williams. But if they don't think Roschon Johnson's going to miss that much time, then just bring somebody in for training camp in the form of Britton Brown, who can take some carries in the preseason game and not be too worried about that. So I think both running back and cornerback are spots that, like, we understandably on the outside with a lack of clarity on their injuries, they're going, hey, wait a minute, this feels like a real concern at running back and cornerback. And the Bears are telling us, hey, don't worry, it's okay. You should worry if we're signing big name free agents to fill a hole and plug in, to get, your Jason Peters equivalent at this stage of the process. You're signing a 40-year-old left tackle to start for you. It's like, oh, that's them admitting they have a problem they need to solve. But when they're not signing a corner or running back, then they're not admitting there's a problem. And maybe there does still turn out to be a problem, but and I'm not here to tell you that you have to give Ryan Poles benefit of the doubt, but I do think Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen deserve some benefit of the doubt until they lose it from us. So let's have some patience with them and see how things play out at those two important positions. Certainly, if the Bears change their mind and sign any big names or trade for any big names at either spot, you can be sure we're going to break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. If you're looking for a second listen today, we know that NFL fantasy draft season is here, so go find the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast with hosts Vinny Iyer and Michelle Madjuk, where you can listen to them every day to prep for your fantasy draft and become the most informed manager so you can take home your league's trophy this season. Find Locked On Fantasy Football on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, then come on back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity for you to bear down.